Chapter 5. The Whomping Willow. The end of the summer vacation, looking he was looking forward, came quickly for Harry's getting back to Hogwarts. This month at the Burrow had been the happiest of his life. It was difficult not to feel jealous of Ron when he thought of Dursleys and the sort of welcome he couldn't expect next time he turned up on private drive. On their last evening, Mrs. Weasley conjured up a sumptuous dinner that included all of Harry's favorite things, ending with a mouth-watering treacle pudding. Fred and George rounded off the evening with display of filibuster fireworks. They filled the kitchen with red and blue stars that bounced from ceiling to wall for at least half an hour. Then it was time for last mug of hot chocolate and bed. It took a long while to get started. Next morning they were up at dawn, but somehow they still seemed to have a great deal to do. Mrs. Weasley dashed about in a bad mood looking for spare socks and quilts. People falling on the stairs, half dressed with bits of toast in their hands, and Mr. Weasley nearly broke his neck tripping over a stray chicken as he crossed the yard carrying Ginny's trunk to the car. Harry couldn't see how 8 people, 6 large trunks, 2 owls, and a rat were going to fit into a small Ford Angeli. He had reckoned for, of course, without the special feature that Mr. Weasley had added. Not a word to Molly, he whispered to Harry as he opened the trunk and showed him how it had been magically expanded so that the luggage fitted easily. When at last they were all in the car, Mrs. Weasley glanced into the back seat where Harry, Ron, Fred, George, and Percy were all sitting comfortably, side by side, and said, Muggles do know more than we give them credit for, don't they? She and Ginny got into the front seat, which had been stretched so that it resembled a park bench. I mean, you had never known it was roomy from the outside, would you? Mr. Weasley started up the engine and they turned out the yard. Harry turning back for last look at the house. He barely had time to wonder when he had seen it again. When they were back, George had forgotten his box of filibuster fireworks. 5 minutes after that, they skidded to a halt in the yard so that Fred could run in for the broomstick. They had almost reached the highway when Ginny shrieked that she had left her diary. By the time she had clambered back into the car, they were running very late and tempers were running high. Mr. Weasley glanced at his watch and then at his wife. Molly dear, no Arthur, no one will see this little button here is an invisibility booster I installed that had me get us up in the air. Then we fly above the clouds. We had been there in 10 minutes and no one would be any with the wizard. I said no, Arthur, not in broad daylight. They reached King's Cross at 11:15. Mr. Weasley dashed across the road to get trolley for their trunks and they all hurried in the station. Harry had caught the Hogwarts Express the previous year. The tricky part was getting into platform 9 3/4, which wasn't visible to the Muggle's eye. What you had to do was walk through solid barrier dividing platform 9 and 10. It didn't hurt, but it had to be done carefully so that none of the Muggles noticed you vanish. Percy first, said Mrs. Weasley, looking nervously at the clock overhead, which showed they had only 5 minutes to disappear casually through the barrier. Percy strode briskly forward and vanished. Mr. Weasley went next. Fred and George follow. I'll take Ginny and you two come right after us, Mrs. Weasley told Harry and Ron, grabbing Ginny's hand and sitting back. In the blink of an eye, they were gone. Go together. We have only got a minute, Ron said to Harry. Harry made sure that Hedwig's gate was safely on top of his trunk and wheeled his trolley around to face the barrier. He felt really confident this wasn't nearly as uncomfortable as using flow powder. Both of them bent low over the handle of their trolley and walked purposefully towards the barrier, gathering speed. A few feet away from it, they broke into a run and crashed. The trolley hit the barrier and bounced backward. Ron's trunk fell off with a loud thump. Harry was knocked off his feet, and Hedwig's cage bounced on the shiny floor, and she rolled away, shrieking indignantly. People all around them stared at a guard nearby. Yelled, "What in blaze do you think you're doing?" Lost control of the trolley, Harry gasped, clutching his ribs as he got up. Ron ran to pick up Hedwig, who was causing such a scene that there was a lot of muttering about cruelty to animals from the surrounding crowd. Why can't we get through? Harry hissed to Ron. I don't know. Ron looked wildly around. A dozen curious people were still watching them. We are going to miss the train, Ron whispered. I don't understand why the gateway sealed itself. He looked up at the giant clock, which a sickening feeling in a pit of his stomach. 10 seconds, 9 seconds. He wheeled his trolley forward furiously until it was right against the barrier and pushed with all his might. The metal remained solid. 3 seconds, 2 seconds, 1 second, it's gone, said Ron. Sounding stunned, the train left. What if Mum and Dad can't get back through to us? Have you got any muggle money? He gave a hollow laugh. The Dursleys haven't given me pocket money for about 6 years. Ron pressed his ear to the cold barrier. Can't hear a thing, he said tensely. What are we going to do? I don't know how long it will take Mum and Dad to come back us. They looked around. People were still watching them, mainly because of Hedwig's counting screeches. I think we had better go and wait by the car, said Harry. We are attracting too much attention. Harry, said Ron, his eyes gleaming the car. What about it? We can fly the car to Hogwarts. But I thought we are stuck, right? And we are got to get to school, haven't we? And even underage wizards are allowed to use magic if it's a real emergency. Section 9 of something of the restriction of thingy. Your mum and dad, said Harry, pushing against the barrier again in the van, hope that it will give way. How will they get home? They don't need the car, said Ron impatiently. They know how to appear. You know, just vanish and reappear at home. They only bought you brother with flu powder and the car because we are all underage and we are not allowed to operate yet. Harry's feeling of panic turned suddenly to excitement. Can you fly it? No problem, said Ron, wheeling his trolley around to face the exits. Come on, let's go. If we hurry, we'll be able to follow the Hogwarts Express. And they march off through the crowd of curious muggles out of the section and back onto the side roads where the old Fort Angelia was parked. Ron unlocked the cavernous trunk with a series of taps from his wand. They shoved their luggage back in, put Hedwig on the back seat, and got into the front. Like that, no one watching, said Ron, starting the engine with another tap of his wand. Harry stuck his head out of the window. Traffic was rumbling along the main road ahead, but their street was empty. Okay, he said. Ron pressed a tiny silver button on the dashboard. The car around them vanished. And so did they. Harry could feel the seat vibrating beneath him, hear the engine fill his hand and his knees, and his glasses on his nose. But for all he could see, he had become a pair of eyeballs floating a few feet above the ground in the Dignity street full of parked cars. "Let's go," said Ron's voice from his right. And the ground and the dirty building on either side fell away, dropping out of sight as the car rose in second. The whole of London lay smoky and glittering below them. Then there was a popping noise, and the car Harry and Ron reappeared. "Oh," said Ron, grabbing at the invisibility booster. "It's faulty." Both of them pummeled it. The car vanished. Then he flicked back again. "Hold on," Ron yelled and slammed his foot on the accelerator. They shot straight into the lower cloud and everything turned dull and foggy. "Now what?" said Harry, blinking at the solid mass of cloud pressing in on them from all sides. "We need to see the train to know what direction to go in," said Ron. "Dip back down again quickly." They dropped back beneath the cloud and whisked around in their seat, squatting the ground. "I can see it," Harry yelled, "right ahead there." The Hogwarts Express was streaking along below them, right Crack's neck. "Due north," said Ron, checking the compass on the dashboard. "Okay, we'll just have to check on it every half an hour, so hold on." And they shot up through the clouds. A minute later, they burst out into a blaze of sunlight. It was a difficult world. The wheel of the car skipped the sea of fluffy cloud. The sky, a bright, endless blue under the blinding white sun. "All we have got to worry about now are airplanes," said Ron. They looked at each other and started to laugh. For a long time they couldn't stop. It was as if they had been plugging into a fabulous dream. This thought Harry was suddenly the only way to travel. Past wheels and turrets of snowy cloud in the car full of hot bright sunlight, with a fat pack of toffee in the glove compartment, and the prospect of seeing Fred's and George's jealous face when they landed smoothly and spectacularly on the whipping lawn in front of Hogwarts Castle. They made regular checks on the train as they flew farther and farther north, each deep beneath the cloud, showing them a difficult view. London was soon far behind them, replaced by a neat green field that gave way in turn to wide, purplish moor, a great city alive with a car-like, multicolored ant village with tiny toy church. Several uneventful hours later, however, Harry had to admit that some of the fun was wearing off. The toffee had made them extremely thirsty and they had nothing to drink. He and Ron had pulled off their sweaters, but Harry's t-shirt was sticking to the back of his seat and his glasses kept sliding down to the end of his sweaty nose. He had stopped noticing the fantastic cloud shape now and was thinking longingly of the train miles below, where you could buy ice-cold pumpkin juice from a trolley pushed by a plump witch. Why hadn't they been able to get onto platform 9 3/4 and be much further? Can it croaked Ron. Hours later, still as the sun started to sink into the floor of clouds, straining in a deep pink, ready for another check on the train. It was still right below them, winding its way past a snow-capped mountain. It was much darker beneath the canopy of clouds. Ron put his foot on the accelerator and drove them upward again, but as he did so, the engine began to whine. Harry and Ron exchanged nervous glances. "It's probably just tired," said Ron. "It's never been this far before." And they both pretended not to notice the whining growing louder and louder as the sky became steadily darker. Stars were blazing in the blackness. Harry pulled his sweater back on, trying to ignore the way The windshield wiper were now waving flatly as though in protest. Not far, said Ron, more to the car than to Harry. Not for now, and he patted the dashboard nervously. When they flew back beneath the cloud a little while later, they had to squint through the darkness for a landmark they knew. There, Harry shouted, making Ron and Hedwig jump straight ahead. Silhouetted on the dark horizon, high on the cliff over the lake, stood the mini turret and toward a Hogwarts castle. But the car had begun to shudder and was losing speed. Come on, Ron said cajolingly, giving the street wheel a little shake. Nearly there. Come on, the engine groaned. Narrow jet of steam were issuing from under the hood. Harry found himself gripping the cage of his seat were hard as they flew towards the lake. The car gave a nasty wobble. Glancing out of his window, Harry saw the smooth black glassy surface of the water. A mile below, Ron's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. The car whopping again. Come on, Ron muttered. They were over the lake. The castle was right ahead. Ron put his foot down. There was a loud cluck, a splutter, and engine died completely. Oh, said Ron into the silence. The nose of the car dropped. They were falling, gathering speed, heading straight for the solid castle wall. No! Ron yelled, swimming the steering wheel around. They missed the dark stone wall by inches as the car turned in a great arc, soaring over the dark greenhouse, then the vegetable patch, and then out over the black lawns, losing altitude all the time. Ron let go of the steering wheels completely and pulled his wand out of his back pocket. Stop, stop! He yelled, waking the dashboard and the windshield, but they were still plummeting, the ground flying up towards them. Watch out for that tree! Harry blowed, laughing for the steering wheel, but too late. Crunch! With an ear-splitting bang on metal on wood, they hit the thick tree trunk and dropped on the ground with a heavy jolt. Steam was blowing off from the under the crumpled hood. Hedwig was shrinking into terror. A golf ball-sized lump was throbbing on Harry's head where he had hit a wise head and to his right Ron let out a low articulate yawn. Are you okay? Harry asked. My wand, said Ron in a shaky voice. Look at my wand. Had stabbed almost into. The tip was dangling limply, held on by few spears. Harry opened his mouth to say he was sure they had been able to mend it up at the school. But he never even got started. At that very moment, something hit his side of the car with the force of a charging bull, sending him lurching sideways into Ron just as equally heavy. Willow hit the roof. What happened? Ron gasped, starting through the windshield, and Harry looked around just in time to see a branch as thick as a python smash into it. The tree they had hit was attracting them. Its trunk was bent almost double, and it granuled both fumbling every inch of the car it could reach, said Ron as another twist limp perch a large dent into his door. The windshield was now trembling under a hail of blows from knuckle-like twig and branch as thick as battering ram was pounding furiously on the roof. It seemed to be caving. Run for it, Ron shouted, throwing his full weight against his door. But next second, he had been knocked backward into Harry's lap by a vicious uppercut from another branch. We are done for, he moaned as the ceiling shook, but suddenly the floor of the car was vibrating. The engine had restarted reverse. Harry yelled and the car shot backward. The tree was still trying to hit them. Then they could hear a root breaking as it almost stripped itself up, lashing out at them as they spun out of the reach that patted Ron was close. Well done, car. The car, however, had reached the end of its tenth with the two sharp chucks. The door flew open and Harry felt his seat tip sideways. Next thing he knew, he was sprawled on the damp ground. Loud thud told him that the car was ejecting their luggage from the trunk. Hedwig's cage flew through the air and burst open. She rose up off it with an angry screech and sped off toward the castle without a backward hoop. Then stretched and screaming, the car rumped off into the darkness, its rear light blazing angrily. Come back, Ron yelled after it, brandishing his broken wand. That will kill me. But the car disappeared from view with one last nod from its exhaust. Can you believe our luck? Said Ron miserably, bending down to pick up scabbard. Of all trees we could eat, we had to get one that hit back. He glanced over his shoulder at the ancient tree, which was still failing its branches threateningly. Come on, said Harry wearily, we had better get up to school. It wasn't at all the triumphant arrival they had pictured. Stiff cold and brushing, they seized the end of their trunk and began dragging them up the grassy slope towards the great oak front door. I think the fair feast's already started, said Ron, dropping his trunk at the foot of the front step and crossing quickly to look through the brightly lit window. Hey Harry, come and look. It's the sorting. Harry hurried over, and together he and Ron peered in the great hall. Innumerable candles were hovering in mid-air over four long crowded tables, making the golden plates and goblet sparkle overhead. The vivid ceiling, which always mirrored the sky outside, sparkled with stars. Through the forest of pointing black Hogwarts hat, Harry saw a long line and scared-looking first year filling into the hall. Ginny was among them, easily visible because of her vivid Weasley hair. Meanwhile, Professor McGonagall, a bespectacled witch with her hair in tight bun, was placing the famous Hogwarts sorting hat on the stool before the newcomers. Every year, this age-old hat, patched, frayed, and dirty, sorted new student into four Hogwarts houses: Gryffindor, Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw, and Slytherin. Harry well remembered putting it on exactly 1 year ago and waiting gratified for its decision as it muttered aloud in his ear. For a few horrible seconds, he had feared that he had was going to put him in Slytherin. The house had turned out more dark witch and wizards than any other. But he had ended up in Gryffindor along with Ron, Hermione, and rest of Weasley's. Last term, Harry and Ron had helped Gryffindor win the house championship, beating Slytherin for the first time in 7 years. A very small, mousy haired boy had come called forward to place the hat on his head. Harry's eyes wandered past him to where Professor Dumbledore and the headmaster sat watching the sorting from the staff table, his long silver beard and half-moon glasses shining brightly in the candlelight. Carol sit along. Harry saw Gilderoy Lockhart dressed up in a robe of aquamarine, and there at the end was Hagrid, huge and hairy, drinking deeply from his goblet. Hang on, Harry muttered to Ron, there is an empty chair at the staff table. Where is Snape? Professor Severus Snape was Harry's last favorite teacher. Harry also happened to be Snape's least favorite student. Cruel, sarcastic, and disliked by everybody except the student from his own house, Slytherin, Snape taught potions. Maybe he'll yield, said Ron hopefully. Maybe he slept, said Harry, because he missed out on the defense against the dark arts of Snape. Or he might have been sick, said Ron enthusiastically. I mean, everyone hates him. Or maybe, said a very cold voice right behind them, he is waiting to hear why you two didn't arrive on school train. Harry spun around. There, his back rope rippling in a cold breeze, stood Severus Snape. He was a thin man with a sallow skin, a hooked nose, and a greasy shoulder-length black hair, and at this moment he was smiling in a way that told Harry he and Ron would in very deep trouble. Follow me, said Snape. Not daring even to look at each other, Harry and Ron followed Snape up the steps into the vast, entering entrance hall which was lit with flaming torches. A delicious smell of food was wafting from the great hall, but Snape led them from away the warmth and light down a narrow stone staircase that led into the Dagon's Inn. He said, opening the door halfway down the cold passageway and pointing. They entered Snape's office, shivering the shadow wall were lined and sleeves of large glass jar in which floated all manner of revolting things. Harry didn't really want to know the name of the movement. The fireplace was dark and empty. Snape closed the door and turned to look at them. So he said softly, the train isn't good enough to the famous Harry Potter and his faithful sidekick Weasley. Wanted to arrive with a bang, did we, boys? No, sir, it was the barrier at King's Cross. Silence, said Snape coldly. What do you done with the car? Ron gulped. This wasn't the first time Snape had given Harry the impression of being able to read mind, but a moment later he understood as Snape unrolled today's issue of the Evening Prophet. You were seeing his showing them the headline Flying for Angelina Mystery Smuggles. He began to read aloud. Two muggles in London Covens. They saw an old car flying over the post office lower at noon in Norfolk, Mississippi Valleys while hanging out her washing. Mr. Angus Fleet of Fable report police. 6 or 7 muggles in all. I believe your father worked in the misuse of muggles artifacts office, he said, looking up at Ron and smiling still more nastily. Dear, dear, his own son. Harry felt as tough he had just been walled in the stomach by one of the mad tree's larger branches. If anyone found out Mr. Weasley had bewitched the car, he hadn't thought of that. I noticed in my search of the park that considerable damage seemed to have been done to a very valuable Whomping Willow, Snape went on. That tree did more damage to us than we. Lon blurted out. Silence, Snape again. Most unfortunately, you are not in my house, and decision to expel you does not rest with me. I shall go and fetch the people who do have that happy power. You will wait here. He and Ron stared at each other wide-faced. Harry didn't feel angry anymore. He now felt extremely sick. He tried not to look at a large, slimy something suspended in a green liquid. Shelf behind Snape's desk. If Snape had gone to fetch Professor McGonagall instead of Gryffindor House, they were hardly had better off. She might be fairer than Snape, but she was still extremely strict. 10 minutes later, Snape returned and made sure it was Professor McGonagall who accompanied him. Harry had seen Professor McGonagall angry on several occasions, but either he had forgotten just how thin her mouth could go, or he had never seen her this angry before. She raised her wand the moment she entered. Harry and Ron both fled, but she merely pointed it at the empty fireplace, where flames suddenly erupted. Quick, she said, and they both backed into chairs by the fire. Explain, she said, her glasses glittering ominously. Ron launched into a story, starting with their barrier at the station refusing to let them through. So we had no choice, Professor. We couldn't get on the train. Why didn't you send us letter by owl? I believe you have an owl, Professor McNagall said coldly to Harry. Harry gaped to at her. Now she had said it that seemed the obvious thing to have done. I didn't think that, said Professor McGonagall in obvious. There was a knock on the office door and Snape, now looking happier than ever, opened it. There stood the headmaster, Professor Dumbledore. Harry's whole body went numb. Dumbledore was looking unusual grave. He stared down his very crooked nose at them, and Harry suddenly found himself wishing he and Ron were still being beaten up by a homing villain. And there was a low voice. Then Dumbledore, sir, please explain why you did this. It would have been better if he had shouted. Harry hated this disappointment in his voice. For some reason, he was unable to look Dumbledore in his eyes and spoke instead to his niece. He told Dumbledore everything except that Mr. Weasley owned the bewitched car, making it sound as tough. He and Ron had happened to find flying car parked outside the station. He knew Dumbledore would see through this at once, but Dumbledore asked no question about the car. When Harry had finished, he merely continued to peer at them through his spectacles. We'll go and get our stuff, said Ron in a hopeful sort of voice. What are you talking about, Weasley? Barked Professor McGonagall. Well, you're explaining us, aren't you? Said Ron. Harry looked quickly at Dumbledore. Not today, Mr. Weasley, said Dumbledore, but I must impress upon both of you the seriousness of what you have done. I will be writing to both of your family tonight. I must also warn you what if you do anything like this again. I will have no choice but to expel you. Snape looked as tough Christmas had been cancelled. He cleared his throat and said, Professor Dumbledore, these boys have fluttered the decrees for the restriction of underage wizarding, caused serious damage to an old and valuable tree. Surely act of this nature. It will be for Miss Professor McNagall to decide on these boys' punishment, Severus and Dumbledore calmly. They are in a house and are there for her responsibility. He turned to Professor McGonagall. I must go back to the feast. Minerva, I have got to give out a few notice. Come, Severus, there is a delicious looking custard tart I want to sample. Snape shot a look of pure venom at Harry and Ron as he allowed himself to be swept out of his office, leaving them alone with Professor McGonagall, who was still eyeing them like a thoughtful eagle. You had better get along to the hospital wing, Weasley. You are bleeding. Not much, said Ron, hastily wiping the cut over his eyes with his sleeves. Professor, I wanted to watch my sister being sorted. The sorting ceremony is over, said Professor McGonagall. Your sister is also in Gryffindor. Oh, good, said Ron. And speaking of Gryffindor, Professor McGonagall said sharply, but Harry cut in. Professor, when we took part, Tom hadn't started, so Gryffindor shouldn't really have points taken from it, should it? Finished watching her anxiously. Professor McGonagall gave him a piercing look, but he was sure she had almost smiled. Her mouth looked less tiny anyway. I will not take any points for Gryffindor, she said, and Harry's heart lightening considerable, but you will both get detention. It was better than any Harry had expected. As for Dumbledore's writing to Dursley, that was nothing. Harry knew perfectly well they had just been disappointing that the Whomping Willow hadn't squashed him flat. Professor McGonagall raised her wand again and pointed it at Snape's desk. A large plate of sandwich, two silver goblets, and a jug of iced pumpkin juice appeared with pop. You will eat in here and then go straight up to your dormitories, she said. I must also return to the feast. When the door had closed behind her, Ron let out a long, low whistle. I thought we had had it, he said, grabbing a sandwich. So did I, said Harry, taking one too. Can you believe our luck, though? Said Ron quickly through a mouthful of chicken and ham. Fred and George must have flown that car 5 or 6 times and no muggle ever saw them. He swallowed and looked another huge bite. Why couldn't we get through the barrier? Harry struggled. We'll have to watch our steps from now on through, he said, thinking a grateful swing of pumpkin juice. Wish we couldn't go up to the feast. She didn't want us showing off, said Ron excitedly. Doesn't want people to think clearly arriving by flying car. When they had eaten as many sandwiches as they could, the plate kept filling itself. They rose and left the office, treading the familiar path of the Gryffindor star. The castle was quiet. It seemed that the feast was over. They walked past muttering portrait and creaking suit of armor and climbed narrow tiny of stone stair until at last they reached the passage where the straight entrance Gryffindor Tower was hidden behind an oil painting of a very fat woman in a pink silk dress. Password, she said as they approached. Said Harry. They didn't know the New Year's password, not having met a Gryffindor perfect yet, but help came almost immediately. They heard hurrying feet behind them and turned to see Hermione dashing toward them. There you are! Where have you been? The most ridiculous rumor, someone said you had been expelled for crashing a flying car. Well, we haven't been expelled, Harry assured her. You are not telling me you did fly here, said Hermione, sounding almost as severe as Professor McGonagall. Skip the lecture, said Ron impatiently, and tell us the new password. It's Wattlebird, said Hermione impatiently, but that's not the point. Her words were cut short, however, as the portrait of Fat Lady swung open and there was a sudden storm of clapping. It looked as though a whole Gryffindor house was still awake, packed into a circle common room, standing on the lopsided table and squashy armchair waiting for them to arrive. Arm reached through the portrait hole to pull Harry and Ron inside, leaving Hermione to scramble in after them. Brilliant, yearly Jordan inspired. What an entrance! Flying a cry right into the whopping Willow. People will be talking about that once for a year. Good for you, and a 50-year Harry had never spoke to. Someone was patting him on the back as though he had just won the marathon. Fred and George pushed their way to the front of the crowd and said together, You couldn't we have come in the car, yeah? Ron was scared as the face grambling embarrassedly, but Harry couldn't see one person wouldn't look happy at all. Percy was visibly over the head of the some excited first year, and he seemed to be trying to get near through to start telling them off. Harry nudged Ron in the rib and nodded in Percy's direction. Ron got the point at once, got to get upstairs, but tired he said, and the two of them started pushing their way towards the door on the other side of the room, which led to spiral staircase and the dormitory night. Harry called back to the Hermione, who was wearing a skull just like a Percy's. They managed to get to the other side of the common room, still having backslid and gained a piece of staircase. They hurried up it right to the top and last reached the door of their old dormitories, which now had to a sign on it saying second years. They entered the familiar circle room with its 5 four posters hung with red wallet and its high narrow window. Their trunk had been brought up for them and stood at the ends of their bed. I know I shouldn't enjoy that or anything, but dormitory door flew open and in came the other second year Gryffindor boys, Seamus Finnegas, Dean Thomas, and Neville Longbottom. Unbelievable, beamed Seamus. Cool, said Dean. Amazing, said Neville, awestruck. Harry couldn't help it, he grinned too. That's it for today. Thank you so much. Stay tuned for next chapter. See ya. Bye bye.